Everyone laughed when I showed up in my grandmother's worn leather boots. The other recruits had the latest gear, the best training, the strongest bodies, but 40 miles through hell changes everything. By mile 30, I was the only one still walking. And those boots? They saved my life. Before we begin, if you love stories about underdogs and proving doubters wrong, hit that like button right now. And subscribe because I promise, this story will blow your mind. My name is Maya. I'm 23 years old, and I was the smallest person in my military training unit. What I'm about to tell you is the story of the 40-mile endurance march, the final test before graduation. Picture this. Scorching desert heat, full combat gear weighing you down, limited water rations, and absolutely no help allowed. If you fail this march, you fail everything. All the months of training, all the sacrifice, all the pain. It all comes down to 40 miles of pure hell, and I walked every single step in boots that everyone said would destroy me. Everyone was showing off. That's the first thing I remember about that day before the march. The barracks felt like some kind of high-end sporting goods store, with everyone unpacking their gear like it was Christmas morning. Chad had these brand new tactical boots that probably cost more than my entire month's salary. They were sleek, black, with some kind of space-age cushioning system that he wouldn't shut up about. Vanessa was lacing up her custom-fitted pair, the kind you get professionally molded to your feet at specialty stores. And there I was, sitting on my bunk, pulling out my grandmother's old leather boots from a canvas bag that smelled like mothballs and memories. The laughter started almost immediately. I heard it before I even looked up. That kind of laughter that makes your stomach drop because you know exactly what it means. Chad was the first to say something out loud. He walked over, his brand new boots squeaking against the floor, and just stared at what I was holding. "Are those from a museum?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No, seriously, Maya. Did you rob a World War II exhibit?" The entire room erupted. People were pulling out their phones, taking pictures, already typing away to post on social media. I felt my face burning, but I kept my eyes down, running my fingers over the worn leather. These boots had seen things, real things. My grandmother wore them through 3 wars. She was a field nurse, and these boots walked through mud, blood, and places I couldn't even imagine. She gave them to me the week before she died, her hands shaking as she pressed them into mine. "These boots never quit, Maya," she whispered. "They carried me through hell and back. They'll do the same for you. Just promise me you'll never give up, no matter what anyone says." I promised her, and I meant it. But sitting there in that barracks, with everyone laughing at the one thing I had left of her, I felt that promise being tested already. Sergeant Reeves came through for inspection. He stopped at my bunk, looked down at the boots, and raised one eyebrow. For a moment, I thought he might say something, might tell me I couldn't wear them, that they weren't regulation enough, but he just nodded once and moved on. That somehow made it worse. Like even he was silently judging me but was too professional to say it out loud. Vanessa leaned over from her bunk across from mine. "Good luck walking 40 miles in those relics," she said with this sickeningly sweet smile. "Honestly, we'll probably have to send a rescue team for you at mile 5, if you even make it that far." That night I couldn't sleep. I could hear whispers in the dark, people placing bets on how far I'd make it. Someone said mile 3. Someone else said I wouldn't even start, that I'd chicken out and wear different boots. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of every doubt, every laugh, every mocking comment pressing down on my chest. What if they were right? What if I was being stubborn and stupid? What if these boots were just old leather and nothing more, and I was honoring a memory that would get me kicked out of the program? I turned on my side and looked at the boots sitting on the floor next to my bunk. In the dim light, they looked ancient and tired, but I remembered my grandmother's hands, strong even in her final days, and the way she looked at me when she gave them to me. She believed I could do this. She believed these boots would carry me through anything. So I made my decision right there in the dark, with everyone else sleeping and snoring around me. I was wearing those boots. I didn't care what anyone said. I didn't care if I looked ridiculous or old-fashioned or unprepared. These boots were part of me now, part of her legacy, and I'd rather fail in them than succeed in something that meant nothing. The sun was barely breaking over the horizon when we all lined up at the starting point. There were 50 of us, and I swear every single person looked confident except me. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I could feel their eyes on my boots. Even in the semi-darkness of dawn, people were pointing and whispering. Chad jogged in place near the front of the line, his fancy new boots looking perfect and pristine. He caught my eye and smirked, shaking his head like I was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. The desert stretched out in front of us, endless and unforgiving, and I tried to focus on that instead of the judgment surrounding me. When the whistle blew, everyone surged forward like we were starting a casual, fun run, not a 40-mile death march through one of the harshest terrains imaginable. The first few miles, people were actually chatting and laughing, still riding that wave of morning adrenaline. My boots felt heavy at first, clunky compared to everyone else's lightweight modern gear. But there was something else too, something I noticed right away. They gripped the sand perfectly. Every step felt stable, grounded, like the leather knew exactly what it was doing. Chad blazed past me around mile 3, deliberately slowing down just enough to say, "See you at the finish line." "Oh wait, you won't make it there." He laughed and sped up, his ponytail bouncing as he ran ahead. By mile 5, things started changing. The sun was climbing higher, and the desert heat began pressing down on us like a physical weight. The casual conversation died down. People stopped running and settled into a more measured pace. I kept my rhythm steady, one foot in front of the other, breathing through my nose the way my grandmother taught me. That's when I heard the first cry of pain. Some guy I didn't know well, maybe 2 positions ahead of me, suddenly stumbled and went down hard. His ankle twisted awkwardly, his brand new boots with their rigid ankle support somehow making it worse instead of better. The medical vehicle that had been trailing us pulled up immediately, and just like that, we were 49. Around mile 10, I started noticing something that made my heart beat a little faster with hope. Other people were slowing down more than I was. Vanessa, who'd been so confident with her custom-fitted boots, was already limping. I could see her reaching down every few minutes, trying to adjust her socks, her face twisted in discomfort. The expensive materials that promised to prevent blisters were apparently creating them instead. My feet hurt, don't get me wrong. Every step was work, but the boots were doing something strange. They were molding to my feet, breaking in as we walked, like they were remembering how to move after years of sitting still. I thought about my grandmother walking through war zones in these same boots, and suddenly my pain felt manageable. She survived worse. Much worse. Mile 15 hit me like a wall. My legs were burning, my back ached from the weight of my pack, and the heat was making everything shimmer and warp. But when I looked around, I realized something incredible. Half the group was gone. 25 people had already dropped out, picked up by those medical vehicles, their expensive gear and their confidence not enough to carry them through. Chad was still ahead of me, but he wasn't jogging anymore. He was walking stiffly, and I could see him limping slightly on his left side. His high-tech insoles that cost a fortune were apparently bunching up inside his boots, creating pressure points with every step. I wasn't talking to anyone else anymore. I was talking to myself, to my grandmother, to the boots themselves. "We've been through worse," I whispered with each step. "We can do this. We don't quit." Mile 20 broke most people. I watched them fall like dominoes, one after another, sitting down in the sand and radioing for pickup. We were down to 15 recruits out of 50, and the realization of just how brutal this march really was started settling into my bones. My entire body was screaming at me to stop. Every muscle felt like it was tearing apart with each step. But my boots, those old leather boots that everyone mocked, they kept gripping the sand perfectly. They weren't failing me, so I couldn't fail them. Then the radio crackled with the worst news possible. Sergeant Reeves's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "Sandstorm warning, I repeat, sandstorm warning. You have 2 options. Find shelter and wait it out or push through. Your choice, recruits." I could see the other survivors ahead of me, and almost immediately, they started pulling out their emergency blankets, huddling down into whatever cover they could find behind rocks and in small depressions in the sand. It made sense. It was the smart thing to do. But something in me, something stubborn and probably stupid, said, "Keep going." My grandmother didn't stop for storms. She kept walking because people needed her on the other side. I looked down at the boots, covered in dust and sand, still solid, still strong. "Okay," I said out loud to no one. "We're doing this." The storm hit me around mile 23, and it was like walking into a living wall of rage. The wind whipped sand into my face so hard it felt like tiny needles stabbing my skin. I pulled my scarf up over my nose and mouth, squinting through the chaos, barely able to see 3 feet in front of me. But my boots never slipped. Not once. Every step was stable, firm, like they had their own navigation system built into the leather. I was completely alone now. Every single person was either dropped out or sheltered, and it was just me and the storm and 40 miles of desert that seemed to stretch on forever. My mind started playing tricks on me. I saw shapes in the sand that weren't there. I heard voices calling my name. And then I saw her. My grandmother, walking beside me in the storm, wearing a nurse's uniform from decades ago. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it was exhaustion and dehydration and my brain trying to cope with the impossible. But it felt real. She smiled at me, and I kept walking. That's when I found Chad. Mile 30 exactly, and there he was, collapsed on the side of the trail. His expensive boots were literally torn apart, the soles separating from the uppers, his feet bloody and exposed through ripped socks. His radio was smashed, probably from a fall. He looked up at me with eyes that were full of pain and something else. Shame, maybe. Disbelief, definitely. For a second, I thought about walking past him. He'd mocked me, humiliated me, made me feel small. But then I heard my grandmother's voice, clear as day in my head. "Strong people lift others, Maya." That's what these boots taught me. I dropped to my knees beside him, ignoring the protest from my own exhausted legs. I pulled out my emergency medical supplies and started wrapping his feet, trying to stop the bleeding. He just stared at me like he couldn't understand what was happening. "Why?" he finally croaked out. I radioed for medical help, giving them our coordinates. "Because these boots taught me to be better than my worst moments," I said. His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was so wrong about you. About everything." The medical vehicle arrived within minutes and they loaded him up. He grabbed my hand before they closed the doors. "Finish this," he said, "for both of us." Mile 35 felt like walking through concrete. Every single step was a negotiation with my body, a battle between my screaming muscles and my stubborn mind. The sandstorm had passed, leaving behind this eerie stillness that somehow felt louder than the chaos. I was alone in a way I'd never experienced before. No one ahead of me, no one behind me, just me and these boots and 10 more miles that felt like 10,000. My radio crackled to life, and I heard Sergeant Reeves's voice, but he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to base camp. "One recruit still on course. I repeat, one recruit still walking. All others have either dropped out or taken shelter. One recruit. That was me. I was the only person still moving toward that finish line, and the weight of that realization almost brought me to my knees. But then something shifted inside me. If I was the only one left, then every step mattered more than I thought possible. I wasn't just finishing for myself anymore. I was finishing for my grandmother, for these boots, for everyone who ever got mocked for being different or using something old or not fitting in with what everyone else thought was right. Mile 37, and I could see vehicles in the distance. The finish line camp. People were gathering, and I realized they were waiting for me, watching to see if I'd make it or collapse like everyone else. My legs were barely functioning anymore. It felt like I was dragging dead weight, like my bones had turned to rubber. But the boots, my God, those boots were still perfect, still gripping, still carrying me forward like they promised they would. The last mile was pure willpower. I wasn't walking anymore, not really. I was willing myself forward, one painful step at a time, tears streaming down my face that I didn't bother to wipe away. I could hear cheering now, actual cheering, and it got louder with every step. When I finally crossed that finish line at exactly 40 miles, Sergeant Reeves was standing there, and he did something I never expected. He saluted me. This hardened military man who never showed emotion, who'd been training recruits for 20 years, stood at attention and saluted me. Then my legs gave out. I just crumpled to the ground and medics rushed over, but I was smiling, actually smiling through the pain and exhaustion because I did it. I looked down at the boots, covered in sand and dust and probably blood, and whispered, "We did it, Grandma." We really did it. They took me to the medical tent and the doctor couldn't believe what he was seeing when he examined my feet. Minor blisters, nothing serious, no major damage at all. He picked up one of my boots, turning it over in his hands like it was some kind of archaeological artifact. "Whatever these are," he said, shaking his head in amazement, "they're the best boots I've ever seen in 30 years of doing this." People started coming by to visit. Vanessa showed up with her feet completely bandaged, barely able to walk. She sat down next to my cot and just looked at me for a long moment. "I judged you," she said quietly. "I was completely wrong, and I'm sorry." Then Chad came back. They'd patched him up and released him, and he limped into the tent with his feet wrapped in so much gauze he looked like a mummy. He stood at the foot of my cot, and I could see he'd been crying. "You saved my life out there," he said, his voice cracking. "Those boots, and you're incredible. I spent all this money trying to look like the best, and you showed me what being the best actually means." Graduation day came 3 days later, and I could barely believe I was standing there. My legs were still sore, my body still recovering, but I was standing. The ceremony was formal, everyone in their dress uniforms, families watching from the stands. When Sergeant Reeves called my name and I walked across that stage, the applause was deafening. He shook my hand and leaned in close enough that only I could hear. "You taught me something out there," he said. "I've been doing this for 20 years and I thought I knew what strength looked like. You showed me I was wrong." He presented me with top honors, and I felt my grandmother's presence so strongly in that moment that I almost turned around to see if she was standing behind me. That night, alone in my room, I sat with the boots one last time before packing them away. I'd cleaned them carefully, treating the leather with oil, making sure they were cared for after everything they'd carried me through. And as I held them, I finally understood what they really meant. It was never about the boots being magical or special in some supernatural way. They were just leather and stitching and years of wear. But what they represented, that was everything. They represented refusing to quit when everything tells you to stop. They represented legacy and memory and the strength that gets passed down through generations. They represented the truth that value isn't determined by price tags or what other people think or how shiny and new something looks. I thought about all those people who mocked me, who laughed and took pictures and placed bets on my failure, and I realized something important. They weren't bad people. They were just people who'd been taught to value the wrong things, to judge based on appearance rather than substance, and the march changed them too. Chad learned humility in the most painful way possible. Vanessa learned that custom-fitted doesn't mean better. Everyone who watched me cross that finish line alone learned that sometimes the old ways, the tested ways, the ways that don't look impressive on social media, those are the ways that actually work when everything else falls apart. The boots became legendary in our unit. New recruits would ask to see them, and I'd show them, explaining where they came from and what they meant. People stopped mocking what they didn't understand. They started asking questions instead, wanting to know the stories behind the things that looked different or old or out of place. My grandmother's boots taught an entire military unit that character beats equipment every single time, that perseverance matters more than preparation, that the things we inherit from the people who loved us carry a power that money can't buy. I keep those boots in a special place now, and sometimes when life gets hard, when people doubt me or judge me or tell me I'm not enough, I take them out and hold them. I remember that finish line, remember being the only person still walking, remember proving every single doubter wrong. And I remember my grandmother's words that have become my own truth now. These boots never quit. They carried her through 3 wars. They carried me through 40 miles of hell, and the lesson they taught me will carry me through everything else life throws my way. Never let others define your worth. Never judge someone's strength by their appearance. And never, ever underestimate the power of something that's been tested by time and proven through trials. Because in the end, that's what real strength looks like. Not shiny and new, but worn and weathered and absolutely unbreakable. They mocked what they didn't understand. They judged without knowing the story. But in the end, character beats equipment every time. My grandmother's boots taught me to never let others define my worth, and I carried that lesson across 40 miles of desert when no one else could. If this story inspired you, smash that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they think. Subscribe for more incredible stories of triumph against the odds. And comment below, what's your pair of old boots? What keeps you going when everyone doubts you? Remember, the people who mock you today might need you tomorrow. Stay strong, stay humble, and never ever quit.